First, I thought we could introduce our wonderful panelists. Do you want to start here and go down?
Yes. Hi, I am Falon Ballard. I am the author of the upcoming Something Wicked, which can be yours on December 2nd.
I'm Purpah. I'm the author and artist behind Suitor Armor, which there will be a book here in a second.
Hi, I'm Ivy Marie. My debut book, Immortal Consequences, comes out on Tuesday, so we're almost there.
Hi, I'm Sangu Mandanna. I wrote The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and my most recent book is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping.
Hi, I'm Danielle Jensen. I'm the author of the Bridge Kingdom series and Saga of the Unfated, and I'm very glad to be here today.
Hi, I'm SenLin Yu, and my debut book comes out on September 23rd. It's called Alchemised.
Okay. Oh, and I'm LJ Andrews, who will be moderating today, and I am the author of Broken Souls and Bones and the Everseas series. All right, I'm excited to do this panel because we all love fantasy and we all love romance, so let's do this. Okay, first question, we're going to start with Falon. Just an intro question. If you could live in any fantasy world, where would it be and why?
Okay, this is such a hard question because, most of them are, not ideal circumstances. I would like to, not get murdered and not be persecuted, and that really limits my choices. So I'm going to cheat and just say mine because it is the world in Something Wicked is very loosely inspired by Moulin Rouge, which I am absolutely obsessed with. So we'll just go with feathers and glitter and fun things.
I'm going to go with an option that also isn't, deadly or whatnot, because I wouldn't want to live in my own. I would say Narnia, because they have talking animals.
Yes.
Good one.
That was definitely a top choice for me. So I would say either Narnia or I want to be plopped into the Avatar Last Airbender world. Just put me in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to go a bit off the beaten path and go with a children's book. In Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow is just the most adorable. I just love that world so much. I think that's where I'd want to live.
I have no survival instincts. I need to live in this world, but if I had to choose, I would choose a peaceful times Rivendell, where it's beautiful and nice, but not during drama times. Not that.
That's the same thing I was going to say, except for I think I would want to live in Hobbiton. I just want it to be very chill, and I want to eat a lot of vegetables, and
I would come visit you.
Yeah, and I can go to Rivendell and see you there.
Just multiple breakfasts. That's
And eat all 3 breakfasts.
Yes, perfect. Okay. We'll start down at the end with Sen down there. In your latest or upcoming release, what kind of lore inspired your world, and how does it help the romantic pairings in your storyline?
So the lore that inspired the world was wanting to kind of play with the more academic side of alchemy, because in a lot of fantasy worlds that utilize alchemy, it tends to be just elixirs, or it tends to be more of the spiritualism of alchemy, and I wanted to get into more of the really early history of alchemy, where it was more treated as this academic science, this really esoteric hermetic science, and just because I found that really interesting, I wanted to go into that more. But it just also creates a lot of, alchemy has so many different interesting ethical dilemmas within it because of the ideas of like being able to produce gold and having endless gold and like this kind of endless wealth and what like that means for like a world economically, and then also like because of the whole ideas of immortality and things like that. And so I brought in this necromancy element, and so for me, like kind of the exploring like these romantic elements within the story was in a more like horrifying way, in which you have all these characters that are dealing with all of these like really large moral, ethical issues within their universe and trying to like reconcile their own desires to survive or their desires to save other people or spare them from like the atrocities of war that are occurring within the story. And so it's these people that are put in this really extreme environment that brings out like the greatest extremes of their own personalities. And then they kind of fall into the sort of sunk cost of like, I've already gone this far, I've already done this choice, I've already committed this harm, and it hasn't been enough. Like, if I stop here, it was all for nothing. I have to keep going down this path.
Saga of the Unfated is Norse-inspired mythology, which, of course, many of us are familiar with. The thing about Norse-inspired mythology, or Norse mythology, is that it is an oral tradition. It was not really written down until Christianity had come to Scandinavia, and so almost everything that is written has a Christianity bias on it. I very much wanted to create a magic system that went into the cracks and the inconsistencies and the things that were very uncertain about a lot of the Norse myths. As far as how they impacted the romance, the magic powers and the gods that the main characters are affiliated with are very much metaphors for their personalities. So because the magic is very much reflective of who they are, it inherently impacts the romance, because what kind of person you are kind of impacts what kind of lover you're going to be,
Awesome.
So I feel like SenLin and Danielle gave us some very clever, well thought out answers, and my law is straight up vibes. Thank you. I appreciate the applause, because it's I don't think it's particularly. It's a cozy fantasy. What I wanted to go for when I was creating my magic system was something that would feel cozy, would feel inherently friendly, like there was, like magic is a character that has its own thoughts and feelings, and if you love it, it will love you back, and it manifests in different ways depending on the person wielding it. So my main character, Sarah, for example, her magic is a night sky full of stars, and the villain, Albert, his magic is lightning. And they're very alike, but at the same time, one is calm and infinite and kind, and the other is violent and sudden. And I liked playing around with how the magic could reflect the character. But in terms of getting my romantic protagonists together, I think the existence of the magic is what gets them together. They need each other because of the other one's magical expertise. And it's sort of, forced proximity, one of my favorite tropes, forces them together. But it's vibes.
You like it?
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you.
So my book is set in a magical academy in the afterlife. So there's quite literally life and death stakes happening there, because though they are all dead, obviously, there are perhaps some fates worse than death, as the book cover says. So a lot of the characters who are confronted with romantic feelings for one another, or even just friendships, have to kind of grapple with these questions of, if you've been, handed an eternity, who would you choose to love? And then if that eternity could end, are you choosing that person, or are you choosing to save that eternity? And I thought that was like a really interesting question to be able to explore with these characters. And yeah, that's basically it.
For me, my world is set where there's conflict between fairies and humans. Oh dear God. I was a pixie hollow girl growing up, and so, yeah, thank you. So as I got older, I wanted to introduce more mature themes to my love of like fairies and fairy tales, because a lot of fairy tales originate in like really dark lessons and hardships and stuff that slowly turned into like cute kitty stories. But my main character, Lucia, who is a fairy raised by humans and in hiding amongst humans, meets and falls in love with an enchanted suit of armor that slowly gains like sentience from the enchantment. And so the lore is very much that there's very unique differences between the characters, that some have to hide and some have to come to terms with, and that the lore kind of shapes around the feeling of just because someone doesn't understand your love doesn't invalidate it. And because even though, she's a fairy, even the fairy side of her doesn't necessarily recognize her falling in love with, I think someone calls him a utensil at one point, So yeah, the lore was very much like things that I loved growing up. So fairies, magic, and then kind of like I love unconventional romances in the sense where like because he's a suit of armor, there's no person in there. So a lot of people ask the question like, well, how are they going to be physically intimate? And I'm like, well, they're not, but that doesn't invalidate it. So a lot of things that I loved and just lessons I wanted to share that just kind of like had a happy marriage.
So Something Wicked is a very loose retelling of Macbeth, and I sort of had the concept of this world in my head where you took the sort of like four main tragedies from Shakespeare with Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, and Romeo and Juliet, and what would happen if all those characters were living in the same world and interacting with each other. So that was sort of the basis of the lore. And what was kind of fun about this one is like I feel like in those other stories, you have sort of like an obvious couple that you would go with. Obviously, if you're doing a Romeo and Juliet retelling, you're using Romeo and Juliet as your two main characters. But I didn't want my couple to be Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So Kate, who's the female main character, is one of the three witches. And then Callum, who is the male main character, is the son of the king. And so it was just kind of fun to take that basis of Macbeth and then mix it up and play around with it.
Okay, perfect. So one more thing on the worlds, though, because it's a big part of fantasy, right? We have a lot of varying worlds, time periods, elements to the things. So how did you decide whether you have a modern setting or a more historical setting? How did you decide how those settings, along with the lore and stuff, would impact not only the romance, but the stakes that your characters are going to face in you? Is it, like you said, cozy, or is it high stakes, low stakes? What do you think? And how does that impact your romances or your main characters? I'm just going to go back and forth. Like, that's what we're going to do, because I don't know what else to do. Go for it.
So I'll start. What was cool about starting with Moulin Rouge as the basis for the world is I did have a little bit of like a visual reference and also a time period. Moulin Rouge is set in 1899. But what, of course, was fun about creating my own world based on that was I could, Google things like, was there indoor plumbing in 1899? And then be like, well, there is going to be indoor plumbing in my world because showers need to be had. That is a must for me no matter what. So it was cool to like sort of have a touch point and then also be able to do whatever I wanted with the information that I found. And I think that it impacts the characters because of course, we're picking up in Something Wicked in a post-revolution. So the monarchs have just been overthrown. We're sort of like at the point of rebuilding this country and this society. So it was kind of fun to take that standpoint of, well, how do you do that? We've had this revolution, we've had this uprising, like what do we do now? So it gave me a lot of freedom to just forget rules and do whatever I want.
For me, my setting was very much in kind of like I chose a like vanilla medieval, but I didn't set it, it's not set in anywhere like England or anywhere. There's actually no name for my kingdom. We choose to ignore that because it's a weird case of it takes place and there's lore in regards to the world, but it's so character focused that I never felt the need to give information that I felt wasn't relevant because I wanted them to really center in on the characters. An interesting decision. I've had a lot of readers pitch kingdom names to me, and they are all correct. So there you go. The main setting, rather than just it being like medieval, I focused more on like a court setting. So on top of there being like romantic drama and whatnot, there's the aspect of political intrigue and people having motivations to try and push across their own agendas and stuff. So while it is set in a medieval setting, I kind of wanted to build on it by introducing like my own magic system and different magical races involved in this conflict and everything. So I went with kind of just a really simple aesthetic that I got to build upon. And since this was sort of my first introduction in telling a story to other people, it was just a very kind way for me to tell the story I wanted to tell without freaking myself out with details. So.
I always knew I wanted to write a magical academy setting for my first book, but I really wanted it to be kind of have like a unique, slightly more dark gothic spin to it. And honestly, I've always been a little bit morbidly fascinated by death and my own mortality from a very young age. But so I wanted to, try to combine those things. And I spent some really kind of cold winters in New England, and I was really fascinated by the kind of really insular, claustrophobic feeling you get from a ivy-drenched campus in the middle of winter. So I really wanted to play around with that kind of claustrophobic feeling for my characters with this setting, and the feeling of this place seeming to have all this order and control, but really there is this kind of corruption laying in the underbelly of the institution. And that's just, I found very fun as a writer to explore with the characters.
I don't think there was ever a question for me that this would be set in like the present day. The nature of the book and the way that I wanted to write the sort of the cozy feeling was I wanted it to feel accessible. I wanted readers to feel like they could perhaps stumble across an inn in the middle of nowhere today and be welcomed and find the place they belong if they were looking for that. And so the setting for me was always going to be today, the present day, and I made a conscious decision quite early on that I wasn't going to ignore the wider uncoziness of the world, but that the inn in Magical Innkeeping would be a haven, a refuge, a sort of like a light in the dark that would call to people who really needed it. And so the inn itself is like the most important part of the setting, and it's semi-sentient. It has sort of its own personality. The magic is sort of chaotic and runs wild. Wildflowers bloom out of teacups, and there's a bedroom where every Sunday it rains apple blossom tea. And it's just whimsical and silly and doesn't necessarily make sense, but I wanted it to feel like home for both the characters and for readers coming to it. Thank you.
To stumble upon your own. Sign me up for that. That's the world that I want to live in. I've changed my mind. It's not Rivendell. I'm moving. I do tend to lean towards historical fantasy, not historical in the sense of our world, but oftentimes inspired by our world. In this particular series, it was very much inspired by the time of the Vikings, very specifically the original Vikings television show. And so when you are working from like a fairly strong inspiration like that, you do sort of have your setting pre-built, which makes it easier because I've written books where I have to completely invent everything. But in this case, I was very much drawing upon a particular time period in our history, making it fantastical, all new names, that sort of thing. But I was able to have a lot of help in my world building. But when I am creating my own worlds just from scratch, I do very much want the setting to be almost like a character, so that, in the case of something like the Bridge Kingdom, the plot cannot take place anywhere other than the setting that I have created for it. The setting is integral, and I do really like that type of world building, and I look forward to actually going back to that type of world building in my next project.
So for me, there were a couple different elements. One was the fact that alchemy sort of as a science kind of died out in around like the 17th century, and it was replaced by chemistry. And so I wanted to sort of explore like in a world where alchemy did not vanish in that time period, like what would it become after that? And then also Gothic literature traditionally, one part of the reason that it became such a prolific genre in the Victorian era was because it was this period in which people were having to like deal with this sort of existential reconciliation of the Industrial Revolution and all of this scientific progress combined with this very strong sense of religious identity in the society at the same time. And so that was just like such a rich, like fertile ground for conflict, like existential conflict within characters as they are trying to figure out like what is true, what is religiously, is religion true, is the science true, and that kind of duality and that cultural identity and all of the upheaval like sociologically that happens because of that. And so that was just kind of choosing a sort of like post-industrial revolution era-ish, Victorian era-ish period, just kind of like brought all of these different elements together in a way that was really interesting. So that was why I chose that period.
I love that. All right, we're going to switch gears just a sec, and let's talk about the men in fantasy, romance, and romantic fantasy. When crafting your male characters, like specifically like a main character or whatever, what do you think the readers expect, and what do you expect as an author? And why do you think, how have you done it with your characters in your latest books to meet those expectations with these guys? And what's the fascination with morally gray? And you, yeah, go for it. We'll start on you, Sen.
So to me, I mean, it was interesting working on there's like kind of two male characters that are sort of main characters, and I sort of developed them both as sort of as foils to each other. And so they have in some ways they have very similar origins in some regards, and yet they also have gone in very, very different directions. And so a lot of the qualities that each one has are a result of them coming from similar origins and yet having different expectations placed upon them, and that causing them to become like more and more cemented into these very, very different characters. One of the things that I didn't want to do is I didn't want a weird age gap. I wanted the characters to be I wanted the romantic relationship to have a very close in age, where they were both informed by very similar circumstances. And I also wanted, I really wanted there to be a lot of character progression in the male main character, in that he is not this static figure of mysterious, sexy, qualities that just that's just who he is he's sexy and dangerous or something, and so he gets put through the gauntlet and is a absolute jerk initially, but at the same time I wanted those reasons, the reasons for the characterization to be in response, be defense mechanisms or things that are characteristics that he's developed as a way of coping with different things. And so then as his circumstances change, he's forced or he chooses to become a different person as the story progresses in response to that. And so you see the character evolution because of these like new relationships and dynamics. Hayao Miyazaki, who's one of my favorite directors, he has talked about how to him, like a romantic relationship is not as compelling as the idea of two characters meeting and inspiring each other to live. And I've always thought that was like such a beautiful idea. And obviously I do really enjoy a romantic relationship, but at the same time, I wanted it to be one that kind of played off of that, they didn't just fall in love with each other, they also inspired the other person, each person to like live and want to experience their lives and want for more in life. And so that was kind of that was a lot of what I put into developing the main character, was wanting him to be somebody who really evolved along the way.
I think we all are aware of what readers like some of the tropes of what readers tend to like as male main characters, and you certainly could just constantly be regurgitating this archetype, shadow daddy, we'll say, which there's, nothing fundamentally wrong with that, but when I've written, I don't know, I think I'm getting somewhere in the 16 published book range. I don't want to write the same type of guy over and over again. I want all of my heroes to be distinct so that, they can't be, they're not interchangeable. You can't put, Bjorn into Kaeris' shoes in the Bridge Kingdom. They're all very distinct. I personally really like highly intellectual men. I like the genius type, the bookish boy, who, is probably fairly handy in a fight, but he is more likely to be the one who is solving problems with his intellect. That is my personal type, so of course I'm going to frequently write that type of character because I think it's hot. So, my own biases come through because I get to spend a lot more time with these guys than you ever will. And I need to love them a lot. But I also tend to really start with my FMC is usually, but not always, the first character who I envision in a really strong way. And so I am trying to create a male character that is a very dynamic counterpoint. I want him to be, for them to be challenging each other to grow into their character arc that I have planned for them. And so, oftentimes he will be somebody who creates a certain degree of conflict for her to overcome because that is how she is becoming her end of series self. So he is the perfect man for her in the sense of character development is often my method. So I have the girl and who is the perfect guy to get her where I need her to, or to help her, aid her, push her on her journey from A to B. But then I often just completely violate that rule, and so, don't hold me to it.
I would just like to agree, bookish men, top tier. Men who read, is there anything sexier? No, I don't think so. I do love a morally grey heroine. I do. These characters are not it. There is no grey here. They are very morally wonderful. But I kind of also hate this question. Because, with the nicest possible way, LJ, I kind of hate this question because Luke, the love interest and the male hero in this book, was so difficult to write. He was a thorn in my side. I went through about 4 drafts in which he felt like nothing. He was the flattest piece of paper you have ever come across. He was like. He was bred with nothing on it. He was just infuriating.
Maybe that was his villain era.
Maybe. I should probably mention that I love him now. This version of him is great. He is. He's had a difficult upbringing. He's felt like everything he is not enough for the people in his life, and so he's withdrawn and learned to mask that behind a kind of colder, reserved sort of facade, but he is a total softie underneath. He's intensely protective of his autistic younger sister. And he has no intention of getting involved in the nonsense that goes on at this inn, but he is drawn in spite of himself, feels himself start to thaw. And I very much wanted to explore a character who was fundamentally kind. He is, like I said, there is no moral grayness here. He is fundamentally kind and good and wholesome, but he has learned to try and hide those things because he feels like they're not enough or they're not good enough for the people around him. And it's about, his journey was very much about unpicking that and him learning that he can be loved and accepted just as he is. Frankly, sometimes it felt like I too had to learn to love and accept him just as he was. But we got there. We got there.
You had your own enemies to lovers arc.
We truly did.
The fun thing about writing this book is that there's 6 POVs. So I had 3 different male characters that I was writing, so I could really explore the whole. There are some morally gray. There's the dark-haired, brooding bad boy who you're like, oh, I just can't help but love him. But there's also a morally wonderful boy in there as well. So that was really fun because I had kind of the whole spectrum. But I will say, just in general, with my male characters and maybe like the romantic elements involved, I'm a big fan of like staring at each other for 300 pages and then like maybe their hands brush, you know? That's just like a man who yearns earns. Is that not the saying? So yeah, even though they're all different, I love writing a male character who truly would just burn the world down for the person they love or save the world, depending on which character it is, because there are some characters who have to decide whether they are going to do either of those things. But yeah, I had a really fun time writing all 3 of them, and I think ultimately they all are enduring the same thing, and I think that's always a really fun kind of writing exercise, is when all 3 characters have gone through the same suffering and have been put in the same circumstances, but maybe the way they grew up or the people they had around them, it ends up affecting how they react to those situations. So that was an interesting thing to explore.
In my case, because this started off as like just a personal passion project, the 2 male characters that I have were just 2 types of men that I love to see, where you have the Suitor Armor, who the character that looks absolutely terrifying but is actually like the biggest sweetheart in the world and is unassumingly genuine and honest, and you know, the cover doesn't match the inside of the book and whatnot. And then you have the exhausted, bagged under his eyes academic who it's just like the morally gray one, I guess, who started off as, when I was originally writing it, started off as my villain. And then as I was writing him and I was learning more about the characters I was going along, I just realized that he wasn't, because he was way more complicated than I intended. It's honestly kind of like speed dating when you're writing for these characters sometimes. And you're just like, oh, I get the general idea, and then you find out that they're way deeper than you intended, and it's like off the rails, and you're like, I thought I was the one writing this. What's happening? But yeah, I just really enjoy the 2 types of characters that I have that are male leads for Suitor Armor, where it's Modius here, who, when he discovers like his intended purpose for being created was to kill fairies, which obviously makes things a little complicated when he's falling in love with a fairy. But when he finds out what it means, like what killing actually means, the second he finds out, he's like, I'm not doing that. You know, like I love male characters that know what they want and are like not budging on certain things, where they're just like, I don't think that's right, I'm going to fight for what I believe in. And then you have the character that is, I guess as you call, morally gray. I think it's fun to watch them suffer and, you know, and develop as characters, you know, how they got from point A to point B and whatnot. And yeah, and obviously like the tension that results.
Yeah, I think with my rom-coms that have been previously published, I am pretty well known for writing very soft boys. And so when I was like, yes, I'm going to write a romantic, I was like, this guy is going to be such a jerk. He's going to be so mean and hard and grumpy. And then Callum was like, no, actually, I'm also a very soft boy. But I think, like, as both a writer and as a reader, I think what I always look for in a male main character is that they are down bad. Like, they fall first, they fall hard, there is no coming back from this, because that is just what makes it, I think, so fun as a reader. So whether they're like a shadow daddy who is down bad or a cinnamon roll who is down bad, as long as you are down bad, I am happy.
I like it. Okay, so we're going to talk about that 300 pages of staring now. In romantic fantasy, there's lots of tension, right? So how do you build it, and how do you keep the yearning and the romance building that, like, between the characters throughout the book? How do you build your tension in your romance? Tell me.
Okay, well, the tension in Something Wicked is all of the sexual variety, because they are embarking on sex lessons from basically the moment that they meet each other. So there is lots of touching. That is not just a brush of the hand touching, which I love, don't get me wrong, that is not what is happening here. But it was really actually kind of fun as, again, somebody who writes a lot of rom-coms where you don't just dive into sex lessons the moment you meet someone. It was cool to kind of explore the different ways that they would open up to each other. So yes, they are having immediately these sort of sexual experiences, but the way that they emotionally open up to each other is the slow burn part of that. So that was kind of a fun, different way to play around with that a little bit.
I'm a really big fan of like physical or magical obstacles that make intimacy hard, only because like when it comes to writing intimacy, I feel like I'm in a room with my mom watching a sex scene on the, and I'm like, oh my God, people are gonna read this, I can't do it. So I'm a really big fan of like introducing ways for characters to still be close, but that is something that they have to figure out over time. Obviously, him being made of metal and there not being an actual like human being on the inside is that. And I don't know if anyone here has seen Pushing Daisies, where if a character touches each other, they die. And I'm like, yes, to remove, don't make it easy, So like they literally have no other option but to yearn. And so I like putting characters in situations where like even if they wanted to, they literally can't. And so they're just sitting in tension, like veins in their fists, just sitting there going like, God damn it. So yeah, I enjoy that a lot.
I feel like I'm the same way. Like I want to have something in like the world or the magic that is stopping them from just, doing what they want to do. My book is YA, so there are some parameters around all this. So yeah, for me, the tension, I love having almost like a ticking time clock in the background, which is kind of what's happening in my book. Like there's obviously these characters who are yearning and pining and longing for each other, but there is very much the very real possibility that they cannot be together, and that one of them, if not almost all of them, will not make it at the end. And I think there's that fear of crossing that line and crossing that barrier and risk hurting themselves at the end because they might not be able to be with this person. And I think that's so juicy when it's on the page. Plus lots of hand brushing and eye contact. I love it.
Yeah, I have to agree with everybody. I love sort of stringing tension along with an external obstacle. Sometimes I do it by accident and don't necessarily know how I did it. But when I'm sort of creating tension between characters, I think one of the sort of dynamics I like to come back to is Pride and Prejudice, where you have two characters who have this fundamental view of what the other one is, and they're unwilling to budge on what that is. It might be a first impression, it might be a third impression, but regardless, it's this fixed impression they have of who this person is, and they're determined to think of them that way, and that's what kind of goes on here. And I like sort of the tension for me comes with them slowly starting to discover through external and internal means that maybe there's something else to this person, maybe there's something there that I didn't quite see before. I'm fairly certain that might be a line straight out of Beauty and the Beast, but let's go with it. And yeah, so I like I think Jane Austen does tension, like romantic tension really well without needing to necessarily stray into like the physics. And don't get me wrong, I love a spicy scene, but I think the build-up to that, I like coming back to not misunderstandings, but misconceptions of who somebody is, and then learning otherwise.
I was doom scrolling before I came to this panel, and I actually saw the Darcy hand clench scene on Instagram. So this is timely. This is timely. I think that just like readers have different preferences on how they want romances to be in stories, what they enjoy, whether they like quick to burn or slower to burn. Authors are the same way. So what I enjoy writing, it's not like Danielle says this is the way you have to do it and there's no other way. It's just the way that I like to do it. For me, tension is very much king. And once the tension is gone, the romance is of zero interest to me. So it is very fundamental to my personal craft to be really not resolving tension until the end of the book, or the end of like the duology is usually how I'm writing my romances. And so I look very much, when you're writing a romance-focused novel, you have a romance arc. There has to be a conflict, like an inciting attraction that gets the couple interested in each other. And then there needs to be a reason or reasons that they cannot be together. Because I write high-stakes fantasy, I tend to write high-stakes conflict into my romance. So forbidden romance, enemies to lovers, you know, there needs to be a massive amount of conflict and drama that they need to overcome in order to eventually get to their happily ever after. So it is very much like a plot arc. And I am always looking for max, like it should seem almost unsolvable. How can these people possibly be together at the end? That is what I'm looking for because it fits the type of high-stakes fantasy that I write. But probably wouldn't fit at the beautiful, cozy inn that I'm moving to. So, you know, it does need to fit the book that you're writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for Alchemised, the dynamic between the characters is quite tragic and very emotionally fraught. And so one of the things when I was developing it was like knowing that like it could not be like a very lust forward, like, oh, I'm super attracted to you physically, you're just so attractive, I just want to sleep with you type of dynamic. Like it had to be like this really deep soul consuming type of thing that developed between these two characters, because that was the only way to explain like why they would go through everything that they were going to go through for each other. And so trying to develop that and making it something that is very fraught, and there's a lot of push and pull, because it's not just a simple like, oh, if we just can get over these barriers and come together, then everything will be great. Everything actually gets worse when that happens, and then a whole new set of problems and like horrible elements like become inserted and asserted into like their circumstances because of that. And they both are aware of that, and yet they are both in these like desperate situations, circumstances that leave them emotionally vulnerable. And so for them, both of the characters sort of end up becoming emotionally seduced by one another, and then the more physical elements of their relationship, the kind of more soulless elements of the relationship sort of stem from that. But it's very much between them is more of this emotional like seduction that occurs that is, to me, like very erotic, is like the more emotional desire for somebody rather than it being like a physical wanting of somebody that's more just like a physical fulfillment. And so getting to like craft that and yet at the same time it's like very unresolved even when this thing finally does happen because of all of the other larger tragedy of the circumstances.
Love that. Okay, did you, while you were writing your upcoming books or a book in the past, did you have a character that surprised you and shifted as you were writing to do something different, or a scene that surprised you with the impact it had on your characters? You can go start.
I knew I had a long list of characters that I knew I was going to be killing, and and so like developing them and like you just go into it knowing they all die, and so like on the one hand like trying to make them like each of their contributions compelling and their deaths like meaningful instead of it just being sort of like offhanded. And this character died, so you know it's a serious story. But there was one character that I knew that the death was going to be a big deal, but because it was like just so set in stone that they were going to die, I just thought that like I was fine with the fact that I was going to kill them. And then when I actually did get to that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I am really attached to this character. And I like literally cannot not kill them, but this actually really hurts.
They surprise me all the time, truthfully, because I'm not a proper plotter. I tend to lean a little bit more into the pantsing side of drafting. So I am frequently shocked and astounded at the things that these characters tell me about their past or their thoughts and their views for where that we should go in the future. So that does happen frequently for me. But what I find often is that a secondary character arrives in the book and they become so interesting and compelling to me that I then have to go write a book about them. And that has happened to me a few times. Most, I think, notably, that many people will be familiar with is in the Bridge Kingdom, Karis, who is my favorite Bridge Kingdom hero, the bookish one, of course. When he came on the scene in Traitor Queen, I had always intended to write Anna's story, but I had not realized that I was going to be writing Karis' story, but he quickly informed me that I would be. And he just, you become so fixated on who are they and the backstory and why are they doing the things that they're doing and what is their motivation and who is this person that is, quite critical to the plot. And all that grows in the back of your head and you don't want to, not share it with all the readers. So then the other book comes. And here we are.
This is hard because spoilers. My character, absolutely, I agree. I feel like I'm surprised all the time by what the characters do. I like to go into a first draft knowing more or less how it starts and then more or less how it ends, and everything in the middle is a complete surprise. It's very chaotic, but it's what's fun for me. So a little bit of plotting, mostly pantsing. But in this particular book, a lot of things surprised me because I went through so many lives, so many drafts. But there's a scene that I knew was coming. I knew I was going to be writing it. I knew several chapters in advance that it was going to be a catalyst to the character's relationship. And to backtrack a sec, one of the aspects of the magic in this book is that Sarah, our main character, sees past versions of herself, like actual ghosts around the house. And so she's effectively haunted by past versions of herself. And one of those versions is one that she absolutely hates to think about or look back on because she's sort of blocked that time out. She kind of thinks that that version of herself is just the absolute worst and she hated what she was then. And in this particular scene, she happens to stumble across this ghost of her past self. And at first she's angry because she's like, the house and I had a deal. He was never going to show me this particular version. But then she sees Luke sort of just sit down beside this other version of herself and just keep her company. Just nothing else, just sits down, just accepts her, even though to Sarah this is the worst version of herself. And it really got me. I bawled a lot. I don't usually cry at my own stuff, but I cried a lot at that one because it was, it meant a lot, I think, for her and for me to see that there was this person just sees you at your worst and still just says, yeah, okay.
I love that.
I'm also what I like to call a discovery writer, in the sense that the first 20K to 30K, I'm writing purely based on vibes. So that is truly how I meet my characters, and how I develop them is really just jumping right in with them. So they are truly surprising me the entire time for that first 20, 30K. And I guess for context, like, this is the first book I ever finished as well. So I feel like I was learning these characters and learning so much with them at the same time, which I thought was really special. And yeah, I also I know this book isn't even out yet, it comes out on Tuesday, but I actually just finished editing the sequel, and I also found myself really surprised how emotionally attached I got to all these characters. Because, yeah, I mean, I always heard people saying, they got emotional when they had to kill off a character, and I'm like, okay, like, you're writing it, it's fine. But I found myself actually crying, which I did not expect that to happen, so sorry in advance.
In my case, I had mentioned previously that the person I thought was going to be the villain didn't turn out to be the villain, but I think one of the bigger surprises I had when I was writing was there was a character that I had intended to kill off and decided to keep them because it reminded me, the revelation kind of reminded me of like when Frodo said to Gandalf, like, I wish Bilbo had like killed Gollum and stuff, and Gandalf was like, no, I think that's a good thing that he didn't, because, if Gollum weren't around, Frodo would have put the ring on, it would have been really bad, So despite the fact that this character is so like, viscerally, you're just like, this character should die, they're not, like, they're terrible and whatnot. Ultimately, they serve like such a larger part to the story than even I realized, and that keeping them around, if I had gone through with killing them off, the ending that I had in mind would not have been able to come around, and I don't think it would have been as like satisfactory. So I think that's one of the most wonderful parts, is like the characters have such a way of surprising even you. Like, again, like, you think you're in the driver's seat with stuff like this, but it just makes you realize how much you're not a lot of the time.
Awesome. Okay. I'm getting the sign to stop and open up to questions.
So my answer will remain
yes,
a
it's a mystery
surprise.
over here.